All right, here's what we are going to do today since I am driving the bus for course. You are still going to take notes. You should have them. Miss Jones should have already given them to you. And what we are going to do is we are going to go through these notes just like we always do. So pay attention, write down the notes as we go. What we are looking at today is the American Revolution. Next year, when you have Miss Smith or myself in 8th grade US, you're going to spend like 2 weeks, maybe even longer, on the American Revolution. But the reality is we aren't looking at US history, we're looking at world history. But it's important to look at how the revolution lined up with the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment that we talked about on Friday, talked about all those new ideas, and we kind of talked about and started hinting at how the United States uses a lot of them. Well, we're going to look directly at how that happens. So we're going to look at 4 main points: French and Indian War, Stamp Act, Continental Congress, and the federal system. First, French and Indian War. When the French and Indian War is fought, it is not fought with America because there is no America yet. We're still the colonies. We're still owned by Britain. Everybody that lives in those colonies is property of King George, the King of Britain. I can't stand the name of the French and Indian War, mainly because it makes you think the French faced off against the Indians, and that's not true. They were teamed up together. It's not the French versus Indian War. It's the French and Indian War. So it's the French and most of the Native American tribes against Britain and us, the colonies, the 13 colonies. Britain and her colonists win all the French lands. So we win this, which is a really good thing. But it's a bad thing for Britain in the long run. Even though they're the ones acquiring the land, what they decided to do with that land, which is give it to the Native Americans, not the colonies who fought for them, really makes the colonies mad. And on top of that, they've now acquired a ton of debt, because we've talked about this before, and I'll keep saying it. The most expensive thing a country can do is go to war. And they do so, and now they've got to pay back that debt. Britain needs to pay back the money they basically borrowed from other countries to pay this off. And they decide to do it through, computer's not working. Hold, please. This is real, live. Oh, no. Issues we're having. Oh, come on. We all know this is Bradley's fault. Come on, refresh. Hey, there we go. Stall. Maybe my dog can come. I'm doing this at home, by the way. Euless, come here. Oh, he's right under me. Hey, buddy. He's under my table. All right, this still isn't working. And it's making me mad. Almost there. Yoss, come here. I'm trying to get my dog to say hi to you, but it's not working. He's wagging his tail, though. He's happy. Still blaming Briley for this. I mean, I could mention how UNC lost yesterday, but I'm not that guy. I'm not going to do that. Here we go. We're close, at least. Click on that. View. Present. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Almost there we go. All right. So what I was saying right before I was rudely interrupted was about how Britain's now in massive debt and they need to make up money. So the way a country makes money is by taxing the people. And Britain doesn't just tax all of their people. They specifically tax the American colonies. And one of those is the Stamp Act. So that's going to be a tax on anything and everything paper in the colonies. And it's going to drive the colonists crazy because that tax keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And they're going, look, we fought a war for you. We got none of the land that we won, and now we're the ones having to pay it back. So that is the root of all of this animosity between the colonies and Britain. And their big cry is this right here: taxation without representation. What that means is they're getting taxed. That's the easy part, taxation, without representation. In other words, there is nobody from the colonies that gets to help make decisions for Britain. So when it comes to a vote, how are we going to get this money? Of course, they're going to tax the colonies because nobody's there to argue for them. So that gets even a more riled up colonies to the point of the Boston Tea Party, which we won't go into too much detail on it. But long story short, the colonies had boycotted everything that Britain made. We're not buying anything from Britain anymore, and that included tea. And these giant ships would hang out in the Boston harbor full of tea. They wouldn't even bring the tea off because they knew they couldn't sell it. We're talking millions of dollars worth of this stuff. So one day, Samuel Adams, yes, that Samuel Adams, goes and gets his buddies dressed up as Native Americans in case everything goes wrong, and we can blame the Native Americans, not the colonists. Sneaks onto these ships and says, fine, you want us to use the tea? Here, we'll make salty sweet tea, so throw it over in the ocean, deal with it. At that point, Britain really freaks out. Britain punishes us. We're getting mad. They're getting mad. It's a whole thing. To the point where we have a meeting, basically. That's all the Continental Congress is a meeting of the smartest people in the colonies at that time. They meet in Philadelphia because of in reaction to what happens after the Boston Tea Party, where Boston gets punished. They couldn't even meet in Boston because you weren't allowed to meet together in Boston after the Boston Tea Party. So they meet in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and they basically say, here's the stuff that needs to get better within a year. We'll meet again back in a year. Well, things didn't get better. So they decide we need to do something, and that something is build an army. And we need a leader, and that's George Washington. Even though George Washington got his butt handed to him in the French and Indian War, they go, he's learned his lesson. We'll let him be the commander. And obviously that's his launching point to becoming the president, but that's American history stuff. So what's their justification to do this? They're saying, look, we've not being treated fairly, anything like that. They're going to point to the Enlightenment. In fact, there was even this pamphlet called Common Sense that was passed around that had all these Enlightenment ideas that, look, we're being treated wrong. Because we had to convince other colonists that, hey, this isn't fair. Because to the guy in Virginia that's just farming away, he doesn't really care what's going on in Boston. But they use these Enlightenment ideas to convince everyone, or at least enough people, otherwise. So at the Second Continental Congress, they also write the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson. That's who that TJ is right there. And we talked about this. He straight up steals ideas from the French Revolution. Instead of life, liberty, and property, he says we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Amazingly, we win this war. We aren't even a country, and we're going against the strongest, to that point, army in the world, and we beat them. But we beat them because France helps us out. Had France not helped us out, we would have gotten wiped out because we're losing early because we don't have the weapons. We're running out of bullets as we're fighting the British. Well, once we get a couple decent victories, France goes, okay, here's a bunch of weapons because we hate Britain too. And that helps us to win. So we win, and now it's kind of the fish from Finding Nemo looking at each other. Now what? So what we do is we've got to create a government, and what we create is a federal system or a republic. So here's what's crazy. If I were to ask you what kind of government is America, you would probably say a democracy. And you're pretty much wrong, kind of. If you got really technical, we're not a democracy. Because if we were a democracy, we would vote on everything as the American people. Instead of having Congress make our laws for us, we would make our laws. Well, that doesn't make any sense, especially back then when they didn't have a smartphone that could have an app to vote for that kind of stuff. They had to. So a republic, what a republic is you vote on someone to make decisions for you. That's why we vote on Congress. That's why we vote on the president. They, in theory, are supposed to do what we would want them to do. They work for us. Does it always work out that way? Of course not. But then again, there's no way to get somebody to do everything every North Carolinian wants because not every North Carolinian wants the same thing. We talked about this on Friday. They create 3 separate branches, the legislative, the executive, judicial. We talked about those, what each one does. The check and balance system. So what that means, that's not like a check mark or writing a check. That means all three branches have a way to check on the other and make sure they're not abusing their power, and it all balances itself out. I gave a few examples of how that works on Friday. Also created, as I said, a federal system. That is, in other words, you had the national government that had their powers and they could do certain things. But then if they don't discuss in the Constitution something that the federal government can do, all that other stuff goes to the states. We've given examples of different stuff that the states get to decide on in class in the last week. Sign a new Constitution, 1787. You'll get into this in U.S. history. The first one isn't any good. We go about 10 years or so with it. It stinks. Add the Bill of Rights, which is individual rights to people. The ones most well known. First Amendment is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of protest. Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. No need to get into all that discussion of what that means. There are other ones. Right to no cruel or unusual punishment is the Eighth Amendment. In other words, if you steal something, we can't just cut your hand off. That's cruel and unusual way to punish that. Where's some other ones? Fourth, you have to have a warrant in order. No illegal searches and seizures. The cops just can't show up and start going through your house. They have to have a warrant. They have to have reasonable cause to do that. And then the big one, this last one, popular sovereignty. What that means is what the most people want is what's going to happen. Not because this elitist group says so, this top group, just because Congress says so, because if Congress does something that nobody likes, they're not going to have their job very long. So that's the idea. Popular sovereignty is just the majority of people, not everyone, the majority get what they want. Here's what I want you to do last. At the bottom, I've given you this all. Go back to your notes from Friday. Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, their fingers are all over the American Revolution and what they thought to do. Based on what I gave you Friday, you can easily point, here's where their influence is, here's where that. Even though this is an Englishman and two Frenchmen, they have massive influence in what happens indirectly by what they think. Once you're done with this, what I need you to do, there's an assignment on Google Classroom. Get that done. If you finish that, which is likely, you can either read an AR book or I would go through Wednesday is the last day I'm taking grades, or it might even be tomorrow. Whatever it says on the board. I don't remember what I wrote on the board. That's the date. Make sure you've got everything submitted. Email me. I know I'm behind on catching up on stuff and honestly putting grades in. I will try to get those done ASAP, but go through and make sure you've completed and marked as complete everything you've done in my class. Okay? If it's something I've already got 0 in, email me. Tell me you did it. All right? Get it done. Go Kentucky. Now the awkward moments where I hit stop recording.